Hello, and welcome to News and Clues from Earth Defense Headquarters. I'm Joanne Richards. I'll be your host tonight, and I'm just so grateful that you're here. I had so much fun last week, and if you didn't get a chance to watch the show, it's up on Project Camelot TV on YouTube. And before we start with tonight's topics, I just wanted to say hello and welcome to any of our family and friends that are watching, especially if any of our grandchildren are watching. We love you. We're very proud of you. Thank you for all your support. And I also want to thank the elementals in our lives because they brought us some rain last week, which helped fight the fires here in Northern California, and that was very much appreciated. And last but not least, but anyway, I want to give a little self-promotion. I have two websites. One is edhca.org for Earth Defense Headquarters, and on that site you can find my DVDs and a lot of reports that we've produced about numerous topics about space, the space programs, Mark's missions, just numerous historical items. And also I have dragonhillbooks.com, which right now I have two fiction books that Mark wrote years ago that I published. If you are all interested in helping our cause and our, helping fundraise for his legal efforts, you can buy a book easily on dragonhillbooks.com, and I'll get it right out to you. So for our news and clues tonight, last week the question was asked, what alien species are working with which governments? So I have a quote from Mark, and here's his input for tonight. Well, it's all his stuff. But anyway, it says, according to most sources, as of the time of this writing in 2014, the Raptors are allied to U.S. NATO nations, while the Reptoids are allied with Islamic terrorists and factions of the international elite known as the New World Order. While the Astarte Collective and communes are inclined to back the Russians and the Chinese, most of the humanoid species try to keep a neutral position to all Earth politics. The mantas are still recovering from their 2 decades of civil war, and the buzzers are involved with several system-wide natural disasters. Most other insect-like species are not friendly towards humans on any level. Other major species, such as the Canonians, who are merchant guilds, are simply biding their time till the human powers decide to disclose the truth about aliens to the general human population, so that interstellar trade and tourism can be pressed into full gear with the people on Earth. It has always been hard to figure out what agenda the infamous Zeta Greys, their gray clones, and their Orionite allies are following. They're mainly because they are most often simply agents of whomever is the highest bidder of the moment. Their bases reflect the changing relationship with humans, often including massive slave handling facilities next to medical and humanitarian aid supplies. So there's our news for tonight. Now, last week I told you I'm going to talk about Hamilton Air Force Base, and then as much time as we have left, we're going to talk a lot about raptors, because they're the one alien species that I know the most about and that Mark is closely allied with. So let's just begin. Hamilton Air Force Base is located in Northern California, in Nevada, about, on a good day with traffic, it's about 20, maybe 30 minutes north of San Francisco. It was very active in World War II, and in the 40s, it was a prime air defense command base to defend the San Francisco area from all forms of attack. And as time went on, it was pretty obvious that it was also against possible UFO attacks. They had radar surveillance on an Air Force base at Mount Tam. They had ground-to-air missile operations, and their fighter jets dealt with aircraft interception, whether it was human or not. Now, it was built, it was built probably in the 30s. Like I said, it was active during World War II, and huge, very large base. And my father-in-law was stationed there, probably starting in the late 40s, definitely the early 50s. and his hangar is hangar number 7, right next to the tower, right next to the flight line. And then it closed in the 70s. I'm not sure exactly what year, but in the 70s, when a lot of the bases were being closed, especially here in Northern California, that base was closed. And now if you go there, most of the hangars, there's a Coast Guard hazmat station there, and a lot of the buildings are used for different businesses. And his office building is still there. It's a storage. They use it for storage and senior apartments. And then most of the base has been turned into housing. So, especially during the war, and like in the early 40s and 50s, there was a large Navy connection with the Naval Air Station down in North Island in San Diego. And as time went on and technology got more and more advanced, you might wonder why they would need advanced technology. And of course, what the public didn't realize is they were preparing for possible UFO attacks. It wasn't always about the Russians. And as I'll talk about the missile sites, it's like you'd have to wonder why the missiles would be aimed straight up as opposed to heading in the direction of Russia, but we'll get into that in just a minute. Okay, now along the West Coast, as you can imagine, San Francisco, the San Francisco Bay Area was a natural target for any enemy. And you had the Alameda Naval Air Station, you had Hamilton, you had an Army base. And again, what most people don't know is that Admiral Nimitz was in charge of an international security agency from about the mid-40s till his death in the 60s. And the Bay Area over time became a heavily guarded, defended ring, just a heavily defended area. And I don't know if they're probably not all, most of them are closed now, but at one point the Bay Area was ringed with Nike missile sites to protect it, because like I said, you had the 3 military bases, and you had over in Suisun Bay, you had the headquarters for international security was using the Glomar Explorer, so you had lots of reasons to protect the bay and its resources, and Admiral Nimitz and my father-in-law, and just lots of things going on. And on each, there were numerous sightings of UFOs starting in the late 1800s. In 1896, there was a very famous sighting of a UFO leaving the San Francisco Bay Area, and it got as far as the Midwest, and then it crashed. What a lot of people didn't know was that on board the airship was an engine that was designed by Tesla, and one of Mark's grandfathers was flying on that. He got off before it crashed, thankfully, as they were testing this Tesla engine. And then okay. And then over time, the military had a lot of wake-up calls with different UFO sightings and ships being destroyed. Different ships in the Bay Area were destroyed. And if we could have the second picture with one of the UFOs, that'd be great. So the military knew they needed to do something. And like I said, by the height of the Cold War, the Bay Area was heavily armed with different bases and equipment. And again, as I said, there was the Bay Area was ringed with Nike missile sites, and there was one on Angel Island, and there's still one in the Marin Headlands that's restored so people can go see it as tourists. And if we could have the Nike missile site, that would be great. I think I have that. And when I went to see this restored Nike missile site, and you can go and have tours, and you go downstairs underground where some of them have stored, and then you also can watch them bring it up through the elevator. What was interesting, Mark used to tell me, was that the Nike missiles would be pointed straight up. And he said Russia could never, their jets could never get this far. And so what did we have? Nuclear, warhead missiles. And one of them still had And, I like to joke, it didn't look like it was, an inactive nuclear warhead when I saw it, but, why would these missiles possibly need to be aimed straight up? Well, it wasn't because of the Russians, because unbeknownst to a lot of people, when there was an actual threat, especially from space, the Russians and the Americans and different countries actually worked together. So now, what's interesting to know, what most people don't know, is that the Air Force in the 50s had Avro, there's a company in Canada named Avro, and they actually built some flying saucers for the Air Force. And on the West Coast and the East Coast, 3 bases on each coast had a squad of flying saucers. And 3 to 6, 9, probably no more than 9 flying saucers. There was a squad at Hamilton. There was a squad at, probably farther north, up in Washington, and then down at North Island in San Diego. And then on the East Coast, there was one in Florida, Norfolk, Virginia, and at Montauk. And it was pretty amazing to think that we actually had flying saucers. But what's interesting to note is that Hamilton Air Force Base, well, it looks like your average Air Force Base. It was pretty special because whenever there was a threat of UFO threat, you had men from Hamilton going to investigate, like the Maury Island sighting in 1947, the Ken Arnold sighting in 1947, and Roswell. Now, I don't have any specific orders that I can see that my father-in-law went to Roswell, and Mark won't talk about it, but I'm pretty sure in my gut, well, I believe strongly in my gut, that he actually went, with his men from Hamilton to investigate the Roswell crash. Now, as I think I mentioned last week, his squad or his unit, his wing at Hamilton, were called the Fighter Mafia. And these were very elitely trained Air Force jet pilots, and the best of the best, the cream of the crop, because they were doing some pretty important secret things from Hamilton Air Force Base. And they, whenever there was a need by MJ-12 or international security, they would go. They were on call, and they were gone a lot. They were very busy. As I said, we had saucers at Hamilton, and apparently they were stored in underground facilities, and those have all been filled in now. And at Hamilton, they've filled in. There's the marshlands have come in. They've set it up as a restored wetlands area. So they've covered up and buried all the evidence of flying saucers and any alien activity there, which is pretty sad, but they're not going to admit to it anyway. One of my favorite stories was in 1952 in August. It was a hot summer day. You had the officers club and the officers pool. You had the officers and their wives hanging out and swimming and whatever, visiting with each other. And all of a sudden, and this is documented in Richard Dolan's UFOs and National Security State book, all of a sudden you had 6 UFOs coming in and then a couple more. So you had 8 UFOs coming in, and the alarms went off. And all of a sudden, of course, the men are all rushing down to the flight line because it's a direct, it's not very far from the flight line. They leave their wives at the pool. They're probably flabbergasted, but maybe they said it, maybe they've seen it all before. And the alarms are going off. The men get in their jets. They start taking off after the UFOs. And out of Rich's hangar comes 2 or 3 flying saucers. And Lois, my mother-in-law, was used to seeing him come out in his jet, standing up in the cockpit, and I don't know if they waved goodbye or anything like that, but this time he's standing up in the cockpit of a flying saucer, an Air Force flying saucer, and they go take off after the UFOs. And I don't know, I'm sure hours passed. And what I love in Mark's report about this incident was that the base commander's wife turned to the women and said, "Now, ladies, you can't talk about this. Basically, we never saw this. We can't tell anybody that we saw this." that's what being a good military officer's wife does. You don't talk even though you see things that you may wish that you hadn't. Hours later, and I don't even know what happened with the confrontation. I don't think it was a big shootout or anything. Maybe they went somewhere to talk or have a meeting. But everybody comes back one by one, and finally, Lois is waiting for Rich, and he's not back, and he's not back. And eventually he comes back, so thankfully he's safe, and that's all good. And then one UFO comes in, and I'm sure they're all on high alert, because what's happening? And it lands, and out of the hull walks this 9-foot tall lizard with this big long tail and sharp claws and scary looking teeth. And he basically, I don't remember his exact words, but he basically said, "Hello, I'm Prince Naga. I am an ambassador from the Draconian Empire." And he spent days with them, telling them about science and space and stuff that the Greys had never told them, and just educated them on so many things. So, and what's interesting, this was in August, and this was, like the following years when my husband was born. And then right after that is when the men from Hamilton had to go to the North Sea and actually deal with the UFO battle. And when Mark's dad came back from that, his plane was either so shot up that he crash landed, and his wife saw that, and it was pretty scary. I know there's been other numerous sightings in the San Rafael area, as I may or may not have mentioned last week. I've seen newspaper clippings. Richard Dolan has talked about it. Preston Dennett has talked about different sightings up in this area. So that's great. But what I wanted to talk a lot about tonight was the Raptors. And so put your thinking caps on. If you have questions, that would be great. And so if you could put up one of the Raptor pictures, it doesn't matter which. So this, in 1952, this was Mark's dad's meeting with the Raptors, and he and Naga became very good friends, and Naga worked with our military. He's still working with our military. I know there was a time in the early 80s where he had to leave the planet, but he was sent here as an ambassador from the Empress at the time to work with the humans. Now, if you're looking at this picture, you can see that they look just like a dinosaur, because that's what they evolved from. A velociraptor type dinosaur, their particular species that they evolved from it's a Dionysus, or I forget the exact name, but it starts with a D. But they tend to stand because they're made for running. They're very strong. They're made for running. They have very strong legs. They have a very long tail. Their arms look like they're scrawny little Tyrannosaurus Rex arms, but don't let that fool you. Their claws are very sharp. They have kill claws, and you can almost see one at the bottom of the picture. And they usually keep them gloved unless they're ready to use them. They actually have different colors. Some are blue, bluish areas, especially around their head. Maybe green, maybe some orange, maybe some brown. And they tend to walk in a T because that's the way they're most balanced. So maybe when they're walking, when they're normal, they will only be maybe 3 or 4 feet at the top of their hip. Now, if they stand up fully upright, they could be 7 to 9 feet tall. And let me tell you, they're pretty scary looking. I've never seen one in person, but I've read plenty about them. And as you can see the picture, they've got pretty sharp looking teeth. And when they're around, potential food, they get very drooly. So you just have to be careful when you're around them. So where are they from? They originated here on Earth. They, like I said, they evolved from the dinosaurs. They were here millions of years ago, and millions of years ago, many of them left planet Earth to colonize space. And they thought that 65 million years ago, there was a asteroid hit the Earth in the Yucatan area, pretty much wiping everything out. There were some raptors left on their bases on the moon and Mars, and some went underground. And what I may have mentioned last week, the ones that survived evolved into the more human looking reptoids. Now, so what happened to them? Again, they were colonizing space, and they thought they'd only been gone maybe a few hundred years, a few thousand years, and they discovered maybe when they had come back that they'd been gone for millions of years. It's like, whoa, how did that happen? Now, Mark is much better at describing this than I am, excuse me, because he understands all the science about this. And I'm going to read another one of his quotes. And as he says, a black hole has an apparent horizon and an event horizon. The two are nearly identical. So when the raptors were out in space, they were not understanding the control over the event horizon. They allowed it to form into their reality, and thus it came close enough for them to slip into its time warp. What seemed like seconds to them proved to be years outside the warp field. As they traveled through space, contentedly thinking that it was providing them with endless power for speed between planets they were exploring, they failed to note that it was also causing them to make vast, multi-million-year jumps on the timeline. By the time they realized what had happened, 64 million years had shot by, and they were alone in the universe. Their mother world having long fallen into the hands of the hairless apes known as humans. And when they came back to Earth, they were not particularly pleased that we took over and that the rodents had taken over. And there are numerous species who do not think of us humans as sentient beings. It's a topic of great discussion at different conferences. But nevertheless, so the raptors have an immense empire out in space. They are governed by an empress. And the picture of the younger raptor that was up a minute ago, her name is Princess Linka. And I'll describe when Mark met her in a second. But she was maybe a young teen when Mark met her in 1961. I'm not exactly sure how old she was. And she is one of Naga's daughters, and she is actually the empress today. And she does believe that, especially in several timelines, that it's a good thing for their species to be allies with the humans. So that's a good thing. So Naga has continued to, and he's come back to Earth. He has a base here. He's continued to work with the human military and try and help us. I'm sure, and he, from what I understand, he has a fabulous sense of humor. And Naga alone can speak several human languages. I remember when Mark and I were first talking about him, and what happens is the more elite raptors have an operation on their voice box, like a series of 4. And if you're a more elite military person, or your social class is, you're just one of the more elite, then you have these operations, and you're able to speak human languages, because their language is made up of hisses and grunt, very guttural language. And Mark can speak fluent raptor. So every now and then he'll, whisper me sweet nothings, or just tell me hello, or something simple in raptor, but it's rather lengthy. But it's very different, obviously, and it's pretty interesting. Obviously, I can't speak a word of it, but it's pretty fascinating to know that, okay, he's not speaking German, he's not speaking French, but he's speaking an alien language to me. Now, he can speak German and French and several languages, but there we are. So let's see. How fast can they run? As I've said, they have a kill claw, I believe, on each. Maybe it's just on their feet. I thought it was on their hands too, but it might just be on their feet. They do keep them gloved when they're not in use, but when they're about to use them, the glove comes off really quickly. And, when they're serious, they can gut a human or anything, just in a couple seconds. So don't make them mad. How fast do they run? I believe they can run 35 to 40 miles an hour. They are built for speed. They are made to run. They start running, when they're little babies, and when they're very young, they're running, and they're learning to catch food and whatever. And their whole civilization is based on the 4 F's: food, fuel, family, and fornication. I don't want to forget this. And if whatever's going on, if it doesn't involve one of those F words, and these are good F words, but one of those F words, then they don't bother with it. They're not big I don't think they invent any of their own technology. They steal technology. They're happy to use it, and they're very advanced. They can use computers, they fly ships, but it they don't really and they have scientists. They're very educated, they're very smart, they're very into deep thinking, and they are very spiritual. They have philosophers and teachers and poets, and they've got a wonderful culture. They've got this amazing opera. I've never heard it, but Mark has. That you could go and you'd be there for days or hours, and they've got these just fabulously complicated operas, and they'll reenact whole military scenes or whatever. And Mark said it's really beautiful. But you could go, and sometimes it's live and sometimes it's holographic, especially if maybe the performer who did it originally is now past, but they want to recreate it, and they'll do it holographically. So he'll talk about their operas every now and then, and he's actually a hero in their society. So there are operas about my husband, so that's pretty cool. And hopefully someday I'll get to listen to it. Now, what do they like to eat? People ask me this quite often. They prefer, they come out of the egg wanting and being fed fresh meat. They prefer fresh, live meat that they can kill. They're meat eaters. They're predators. They often, when they're here on Earth, they often import other dinosaur breeds that, yes, they still have them alive, for their pack herds to hunt them and whatever. They'll eat deer, they'll eat sheep. You need to have several sheep around just in case, they get hungry, because you want them eating the sheep and not you. To disclose the truth about aliens to the general human population, so that interstellar trade and tourism can be pressed into full gear with the people on Earth. It has always been hard to figure out what agenda the infamous Zeta Greys, their gray clones, and their Orionite allies are following. They're mainly because they are most often simply agents of whomever is the highest bidder of the moment. Their bases reflect the changing relationship with humans, often including massive slave handling facilities next to medical and humanitarian aid supplies. So there's our news for tonight. Now, last week I told you I'm going to talk about Hamilton Air Force Base, and then as much time as we have left, we're going to talk a lot about Raptors, because there's Mark's missions, just numerous historical items. And also, I have dragonhillbooks.com, which right now I have 2 fiction books that Mark wrote years ago that I published. If you are all interested in helping our cause and helping fundraise for his legal efforts, you can buy a book easily on dragonhillbooks.com, and I'll get it right out to you. So for our news and clues tonight, last week the question was asked, what alien species are working with which governments. So I have a quote from Mark, and here's his input for tonight. Well, it's all his stuff. But anyway, it says, according to most sources, as Hello, and welcome to News and Clues from Earth Defense Headquarters. I'm Joanne Richards. I'll be your host tonight, and I'm just so grateful that you're here. I had so much fun last week, and if you didn't get a chance to watch the show, it's up on Project Camelot TV on YouTube. And before we start with tonight's topics, I just wanted to say hello and welcome to any of our family and friends that are watching, especially if any of our grandchildren are watching. We love you. We're very proud of you. Thank you for all your support. And I also want to thank the elementals in our lives because they brought us some rain last week, which helped fight the fires here in Northern California, and that was very much appreciated. And last but not least, but anyway, I want to give a little self-promotion. I have two websites. One is edhca.org for Earth Defense Headquarters. And on that site, you can find my DVDs and a lot of reports that we've produced about numerous topics about space, the space programs. At the time of this writing in 2014, the Raptors are allied to U.S. NATO nations, while the Reptoids are allied with Islamic terrorists and factions of the international elite known as the New World Order. While the Astarte Collective and communes are inclined to back the Russians and the Chinese, most of the humanoid species try to keep a neutral position to all Earth politics. The mantas are still recovering from their 2 decades of civil war, and the buzzers are involved with several system-wide natural disasters. Most other insect-like species are not friendly towards humans on any level. Other major species, such as the Canonians, who are merchant guilds, are simply biding their time till the human powers decide